Now we're going to use our selective sharpening techniques to work on a portrait, and you can see that we can do some amazing things. All right, let's get started. The portrait we're going to use is this one of the model that we've looked at before in some of the other tutorials, and we know that in this particular portrait there is some texture in the skin tone that we don't want to sharpen. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually blur that out. Now let's just go back into here. We cleaned up our background a little bit, and let's see what we're going to do. The first thing that we want to do is we want to sharpen the eyes, and we also want to sharpen the eyebrows. We also want to sharpen the nose and the lips and the hair. So we're going to take these one or two at a time and work on them that way. So let's get started with the eyes. Let's make this a little bit larger. I'm taking it up to 50% right now using my Command or Control plus keys. And basically all I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the eyebrows and eyes. I'm going to hold my Shift key down so that I can select the other eyebrow at the same time here, and the other eye. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to jump it up to its own layer by hitting Command or Control J. All right, here's our eyes. Now, the way that I choose to sharpen this is I'm going to use the lighten and darken blending modes on here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to sharpen it using my unsharp mask. Let's go down here to unsharp mask, and then I'm going to duplicate my layer. Okay, so here's my eye, and let's see, I want to sharpen that up quite a bit here. So let's wait for this to render. There we go. I'm going to increase this up to maybe 130% because I want these eyes to just absolutely sparkle. Maybe bring the radius back down just a little bit and bring the amount up a little bit more. There we go. Okay. And now I say OK on here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate this layer. And again, I can duplicate the layer just by hitting Command or Control J. On one of these, I want to call it Eyes, Light, and I'm going to call the other one Eyes Black. There. Now, on the Eyes Black, or actually it should be Eyes Dark, I'm going to change my blending mode to Darken. Now let's turn our background layer on here, and let's just use the Darken only, and then on the Eyes Light we'll put that in Lighten mode. Okay, so now there's our normal image, the Darken, which looks very nice, and the Lighten, which is a little too light, so let's pull back the opacity just a little bit on there. Okay, so much for our eyes and eyebrows. For right now, we're not finished with that because remember we have some other parts in here that we don't want to use. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the two layers and I'm going to combine these layers and put them inside of a layer grouping. And the way I do that is hold down my Shift key and just select both of these, and then while I'm still holding my Shift key, I'm going to click on the layer group icon, which is like a little folder, and I can call that Eyes. And now I can put a layer mask on this, and what I choose to do here is use a black layer mask so that I can paint in the sharpness in just a moment. So I'm going to hold my Option key down and click on the layer mask icon, and you can see that I have a black layer mask that conceals everything below. So now when I look at it, I don't see any sharpening. If I paint on this layer mask with white, and I'm going to be using my brush tool here, I'm going to be painting at 100% opacity, then I can paint my sharpening in. So let's use a brush that's a little bit bigger here, and now you can see that I'm painting in my sharpness on this eye. And we come over to the other eye, and we can paint the sharpness in here also. And I can do the same thing on the eyebrows because they were sharpened also. All right, now let's turn off our background layer so that we can see, and let's jump this up to 100%, and we can see what I've painted in here. And if I want to get rid of some of this on the outside, all I have to do is paint with black. And let's make our brush a little bit smaller, so now I can just come out and work on this like this. So now we have a nice blending, and we have our sharpness in our eyes. So here's the before, and here's the after in the eyes. Now we're going to move down to the mouth and the nose. Highlight our background layer. Again, we make a loose selection with our lasso tool around the nose, just the parts that we want to have sharpened. I hit my Command or Control J to jump up my layer, and now let's go in and let's sharpen that. And again, I'm just going to use the unsharp mask. By the way, there's a shortcut here. If I want to apply the same numbers that I did in the previous time I used the unsharp mask, all I have to do is just hit Command or Control F. If I hold my Option or Alt key down, what happens is it goes in and brings the dialog box back up so that I can change my settings. So I want to make this not quite as sharp as it was before, but I want to make it a little bit sharper, so let's say OK. Now again, I'm going to put a black layer mask on here. I'm going to hold down my Option key or my Alt key, and there's my black layer mask. And I go into my brush, and I can paint in white and just bring in a little bit of sharpness around the nose here, just to accent it a little bit more. We'll call this nose. Now I'm going to do this one more time. This time I'm going to go in and I'm going to highlight the lips, and I'm even going to highlight this little smile line out here and bring that in. Okay, here's my lips. I'm going to jump it up to a new layer, and now I'm going to go in and I'm going to use, on this one, I think I'm going to use the Smart Sharpening. And the reason I'm going to use Smart Sharpen is because there's going to be some highlights in here. And what I want to do is I want to fade some of those highlights. For right now, let's bring the highlights, the fading, down to 0. Let's sharpen this up a little bit. Maybe bring the radius down just a touch. There's before and after. Bring this up a little bit more. And now I can come over to my highlights, and I can fade my highlights a little bit so that it's not quite so glossy. Okay, so here's our sharpening on the lips. And again, what I can do is I can hold my Option or Alt key down, and I can put my black layer mask on there, show my background layer, go to my brush tool, and I can paint in white at 100% opacity, and I can just paint my sharpness right into my lips. Actually, these are not my lips, these are the model's lips, but you know what I mean. Okay, now I don't want the smile line to be 100% sharp, so let's bring that opacity of that to maybe 30%. And I'd get to there just by hitting the 3 key on my keyboard, and you can see the opacity changed up here. Of course, I could have always just used my slider to do the same thing. And now I'm just going to do a little bit of sharpening here on the smile line. And you can see I can turn it off and on. Whoops, wrong layer. I can turn it off and on so that there's our sharpening there. Okay, now we've done our basic sharpening on the face. The only other thing that I want to sharpen here is the hair. And let's take this down to, well, it's 33%. That's good. Let's move it over here. And now I'm just going to use my lasso selection tool. Let's go to the background. I'm going to use my lasso selection just to give me a rough selection around the hair. I can go back in and fine-tune this selection in just a moment. because now I'm going to go in and I'm going to sharpen the hair. And let's see, did I miss any hair? No, didn't miss any hair, and I'm not, well, let's see, I'm going to hold down my Option or Alt key and just remove some of the selection around here, around the eye. And everything else looks fine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump this up to its own layer. And now I can go in and I can sharpen that hair. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the sharpen with the unsharp mask. And let's just see what we have here. Okay, that looks all right. Let's just leave it the way it is, and we'll sharpen that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and put my black layer mask on this layer by holding my Option or Alt key and clicking on the layer mask icon. And now, using my white paintbrush at 100% opacity, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to paint in some of the sharpness on this hair. There we go. Get it around the front and some of this other area out in here. And you can see here that I'm beginning to get the sharpness into the hair. And let's turn it off and on just to see where we are. Okay. And there we are. Let's just turn this off, and you can see the parts of the hair that I've sharpened here. Let's turn this back on, and we can bring this in a little bit more. Some of the hair toward the back of the head we really don't need to sharpen because it's kind of out of the plane of focus. Okay, now let's take everything that we've sharpened and let's put that inside its own layer group. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to hold down my Shift key and select all of these, and then holding the Shift key down still, I'm going to use the layer mask, or I'm sorry, the layer group. Everything is in there. I'm going to call this sharp. Okay, now I can turn all my sharpness off and on, and you can see what I've got here. Now to work on the skin. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a lens blur to soften the skin. So what I need to do first is I need to make a selection of this skin area. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my background layer and I'm going to duplicate that. So I have a copy of the background layer now. And now I'm going to make a rough selection using my lasso tool again, a rough selection around the skin. And we'll just go like this, and actually we can do it in a couple of chunks here. It makes it a little bit easier. Holding my Shift key down, we'll just come down right on the outside of the skin, and we can make our selection like this. Okay, now that's just kind of a helper selection, because now I'm going to go into Select Color Range, and I'm just going to grab some of the, well, just about all the colors inside here and make our selection in here, and then we're going to blur this out a little bit. Okay, there we go. All right, so there's our selection, and let's say OK, and you can see that I've got a pretty good selection here. I don't know if this is really selected enough out here, so let's maybe go back into the color range and get a little more selection there. Unfortunately, it doesn't go back to exactly the way it was, but we can go in and pull a lot of this out like this, increase our fuzziness a little bit, and make sure that the selections down in here are selected. So now we come in, and we've got our selection, and now all I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a layer mask on this background copy so that we just have the portions that we wanted selected. Now let's remove our sharpen layer here, and let's see what we have. Okay, I've got a little too much selected, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my layer mask here, and I'm going to paint with black because I want to remove some of this selection. So go to a paintbrush and just paint with black in here, and I'm going to remove some of the hair that was selected here, and we're going to get some of the garment that was selected, get rid of that like this, and we can fine-tune this a little bit later, but this is what we want to do in here. Now again, this hair has been sharpened on top, so it's really it may be covering this, so we don't have to be absolutely critical in here. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is, let's turn this on. We're going to leave our sharpening layer off for right now. I'm going to go in and I'm going to highlight my image, not my layer mask, and I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Lens Blur. And now we're going to get into our lens blur here, and we can look and see everything that's going to be happening here. First of all, let's take our radius down to 0 so that we can get our original image. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a depth map, which means which areas are going to be blurred. And I'm going to use my layer mask for that. So now I can increase my blur distance here, my blur focal distance, and let's see what's happening here. Not a lot, because I don't have my radius selected yet. So let's go down into here and let's bring our radius out a little bit and see what we do. Okay, now you can see I've got a lot of blurring done in the face. Let's bring that down a little bit. The radius is out a little bit too far. And octagon shape is what I've chose to use here because I'm assuming I have an 8-bladed shutter. Let's add a little bit more in the radius here. There we go. And we can see that we've got blurring in the face, but not blurring in the garment or in the hair or in the background. So what we're doing here is we're just kind of eliminating our skin textures. Let's jump this up a little bit by hitting the Command or Control plus, and we can see more of what's happening in the face. So let's change the blur distance down just a little bit and bring the radius down just a hair. And now let's accept that because that looks fine. I don't want to put any noise in here, and I'm not going to worry about my specular highlights. So we'll just say OK. It's going to apply the filter, and there's my blur. So what we have now is we have, building from bottom to top, we have our original background, and now we're going to go in and we're going to blur the skin tones, and now we're going to apply the sharpening that we put in with our eyes and with our lips and with the nose and in the hair, and our image is finished.